Richard Horn, Beyond the Wall on Regal Radio.
This is Richard Horn, and I'll be your host on Beyond the Wall. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about conspiracies, government, and everything that is wrong with Britain and the world. At this time, I'm disillusioned with our government. Tories, Labour, the lot of them. It seems that all the mainstream political parties have lost sight of what's truly important, which obviously first and foremost should always be for the welfare and progression of the people and the nation. The members of our parliament have failed to recognise the needs of the people. Now my aim is to expose these conspiracies, to bring it all out into the light. I try to cover all these topics on my show. And as this is my first episode, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for tuning in. First up, we have an interesting piece on the Loch Ness Monster.
The legend of the Loch Ness Monster can be traced back to AD 565, when St. Columba, a Christian missionary, banished the murderous water beast to the lake. Murmurings about the monster in the loch continued throughout the centuries, but it was largely considered to be an old wives' tale used to prevent children from straying too close to the deep lake. In 1933, reported sightings of the monster and photographic evidence began to emerge, renewing interest in the mystery of the Loch Ness Monster. Tensions between England and Scotland arose when an English institution, the Natural History Museum, put a bounty on the monster's head in the hope that its carcass could be added to its museum. The Royal Scottish Museum was shocked at the idea of the monster being taken from Scotland, warning that such a fate would surely outrage Scottish nationalism, which at the moment is thriving greatly under the monster's beneficent influence. Worried about the potential threat to the monster, members of the British government, such as Inverness MP Murdoch MacDonald, requested that the government pass a special Act of Parliament to protect the monster from harm. By the 1960s, searches for the Loch Ness Monster remained inconclusive, despite a constant influx of visitors to the area keen to catch a glimpse of the beast. Even a member of the royal family, Prince Philip, encouraged MP David James to enlist the Navy to find the Loch Ness Monster. It is not known whether the Navy took on the Prince's suggestion. Still, Navy or not, the hunt continued. Documents released under the Freedom of Information Act reveal that in 1979 the British government under Margaret Thatcher secretly proposed importing dolphins to the loch and attaching high-tech equipment to them in order to hunt for the monster. Just 2 years later, the Civil Service legislated to protect the Loch Ness Monster in the Wildlife and Countryside Act. The Scottish Development Department outlined that the legislative framework to protect the monster is available provided she is identified by scientists whose reputation will carry weight with the British Museum. But why did the UK government put this legislation in place 40 years after the myth was reignited? After decades of searching, had the British government finally found the beast, and were they now hiding it? The plot thickened when, in 1985, the British Embassy in Sweden contacted the Scottish office for advice on how to protect their own lake dweller, known as the Swedish version of the Loch Ness Monster, the Sturgeon Monster. A few months later, Sweden passed their own legislation to prohibit the destruction, injury or capture of the sturge monster species. The official Loch Ness Monster website say this proves that the UK government has successfully found and protected the Loch Ness Monster. Unless the government confirms the motive for its legislation, we will never know for sure.
The government never fails to amaze me. They cover up so much. They hold things back from the people. It's amazing. The sort of things that go on without people knowing. Honestly, I should imagine they've got all types of strange creatures being experimented on, probably for the purpose of war, locked away in secret labs. Some might say that it just doesn't bear thinking about, but they couldn't be more mistaken. When a government hides knowledge from its people, that is a slur upon your liberty. And now, we have an interesting piece by David Icke about reptilians.
I think if you look at John Carpenter, the creator of They Live, if you look at his movie-making history, which includes Satanism and horror and what have you, this guy has at least some knowledge of what's happening. And I had to laugh. I said this in a book once, years ago, and someone wrote to John Carpenter saying what I'd said. And he wrote back to him, I saw the letter, saying, no, it wasn't. The aliens, inside the people, I was symbolizing the Republicans. And you go, yeah, John, all right, yeah, okay, you were, yeah. I mean, anyone who's seen They Live will laugh at that. And I think if you look at They Live, it's classic, and that time back too, where you have a small number of people who are actually not what they seem. They look human to people in everyday life, but when the guy put the sunglasses on that allowed him to decode reality on another level, that was the symbolism of it, he saw that they actually, behind the human form, they weren't human at all. And they were the people in power. They were the bankers, they were the politicians, they were the president, they were some of the police. Also, when he put the glasses on that subliminal level, he could see all the subliminal messages all around him, telling him to stay asleep, to not question, to obey authority. And it was a movie, it was kind of a B-movie, wasn't it? A kind of most people would never have heard of, and yet it was way ahead of its time in portraying the world that we're actually living in.
I've always personally been a fan of David Icke. He can react badly when questioned by media, but he has some very interesting theories. In the past, he has been painted a lunatic by the media, made out to be a man who's lost his mind, who believes that the royal family are reptiles in human skin. He made a very foolish comment, calling himself the Godhead, but apart from these shortcomings, he has a very interesting view on society. He holds a lot of opinions and theories that could not always be disproved. I've got one more piece to play you before I end my show. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. It's only a short show, I'm afraid, quite a regular thing, just talking about the sort of things that I've been talking about. So I'm going to leave you now with a small piece called How Dangerous is the United Kingdom?
You're listening to Richard Horn, Beyond the Wall on Regal Radio.
For centuries, Great Britain ruled across the land and seas as the largest empire in the world. invading all but 22 countries, the British Empire was one of the most successful, yet brutal regimes in history. But although the British Empire has since dissolved, the UK remains an incredibly powerful force. According to a think tank called European Geostrategy, the UK's global influence is second only to the United States. With political instability in the Middle East and terrorist attacks on the rise, the UK has also announced plans to increase its $61 billion military budget. Decades after the fall of the Empire, Britain remains a pillar of influence and brute force in the world. Prime Minister David Cameron has stated he is prepared to act against all those who present a threat to the UK. Throughout its imperial history, Britain has colonised and exploited other countries for its own benefit. It's been calculated that Britain is responsible for as many as 150 million deaths across Asia, Africa, and Europe. And it's still causing destruction today. Since David Cameron became leader of the UK in 2010, Britain has escalated its participation in military activities around the world, citing the War on Terror as its reason. But journalist Kit O'Connell claims that the UK operates with ulterior motives. By extracting foreign resources and inhibiting the growth of developing countries, the UK secures its own position of power, and Britain's support of America in the Middle East allows the UK to promote its own agenda. The special relationship between the States and the UK means that Britain has huge leverage in manipulating the foreign policy, trade and economics of other countries. Britain and America are permanent members on the UN Security Council and operate an economic and military partnership. Notably, in 2003, they led the invasion of Iraq together. Under the pretense of searching for weapons of mass destruction, US and British forces seized control of the country in a prolonged and bloody war, which caused the death of 500,000 Iraqis. No weapons of mass destruction were ever discovered. It was later revealed that the British government believed they would be given a share of Iraq's enormous oil and gas reserves in exchange for supporting America's invasion. Years after the war, Iraq is politically unstable, with employment levels as high as 60% and untold damage done to the country's cultural heritage. It is unsurprising that IS rose to sudden power in such circumstances. According to newspaper The Economist, Britain ranks as the top country in the world in terms of soft power, using its ability to coax and persuade other countries to follow its wishes, often with devastating consequences. In 2015, Prime Minister Cameron called for the removal of Syria's President Bashar al-Assad. This echoes his stance in 2011, when Britain led NATO attacks to remove Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, which caused the country to descend into anarchy and a 6-month civil war, which resulted in 30,000 deaths. But not only does Britain own the power of persuasion, but it has one of the most preeminent armed forces in the world today. The UK already possesses a stockpile of nuclear weapons, including in excess of 225 thermonuclear warheads. And despite Russia and China spending more on their respective militaries, they trail behind the UK because of Britain's ability to dispatch and sustain its army at a moment's notice. It is estimated the UK can drop approximately 40,000 troops into any global theatre with relative ease. According to Professor Malcolm Chalmers, the Director of UK Defence Policy Studies, the UK remains a deadly military force because of its operating range and effectiveness at mobilising troops. This is because of the massive network of bases British armed forces have established around the world, and its elite groups of expertly trained soldiers, like the SAS. Currently, British soldiers are deployed in over 80 countries. Political journalist Kevin Gosztola asserts that the UK is still using the threat of terrorism to justify drone strikes and foreign intervention. In August 2015, the British government even admitted to using the drone assassination of British citizen Rayad Khan in Syria as an excuse to conduct a strike on a country where it was not officially involved in a war. The Cameron administration has refused to offer legal justification for the killing, nor did it receive legislative approval before carrying out the strike. The British Empire may not reign supreme quite like it used to, but it still has a significant position in the G7, UN Security Council, NATO, and the EU. Combined with the resources of the British Commonwealth and the might of its military at its disposal, Britain remains one of the most influential and therefore most dangerous powers in the world.